Father, guide us as we go into your word. May your Spirit be present with us, guiding us into understanding. I pray for every single person in this room to have their ears opened to whatever you might have to say, including my own, God. And I pray that you would have us speak when you would have us speak, and that you would have us be silent when you would have us be silent. And that through all of this, we would come to not only have a better understanding of you and what you're doing in the world and what you're communicating through this text, but also that we'll have a better love for you, God, and a larger desire to be closer to you. And that by the end of this Bible study, we will desire nothing more than to be as close to you as possible. And as a result of that desire, that we'll be better equipped to both love you and love others as we depart from here tonight. I thank you for this group, God. I thank you so much for the opportunity you have given us to gather together freely. Let us not take that for granted, but let us set aside any distractions and really just focus on you. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right. We have got a mammoth of a chapter ahead of us today. It's like 43 verses long. And if you know me, I can make like a 10-verse chapter last like 2 hours. And so we're not going to be able to go as in-depth as I would like. But that being said, I'm going to give us the context just so that I can try to make this as brief as possible so that we can just hop right in. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 19. We're in 2 Samuel chapter 19, which is near the end of 2 Samuel. And 2 Samuel itself is the second part of 1 Samuel. And so we are really nearing the end of this whole saga, which is the story of David. Maverick, are you all right over there?
Okay.
You sure? You were making like a face that looked like you just had like the most sour candy in the world. Are you sure you're all right? Okay, just making sure. If you go way back to the beginning of 1 Samuel, we basically were introduced to the people of Israel at the end of the time period of the Judges. And the time period of the Judges was basically a time period not long after the people entered the Promised Land for the first time, and everybody was doing what was right in their eyes. There was no king in Israel. Things were not going well. Well, eventually a king is put in place, and he's not the best. His name is King Saul. But another king is put in his place, and his name is David, and he is actually an amazing guy. And we have been tracking the life of David ever since 1 Samuel chapter 16, right? And really, we've been following the story of David since 1 Samuel chapter 13, because that's whenever we first heard about this unknown man after God's own heart who was going to show up later on, right? And so we've been with David the majority of this time, but it wasn't until the second chapter of 2 Samuel that he actually became king. So we saw this long saga and this epic journey of David going through these ups and downs whenever he was on the run from Saul and doing all that stuff. But at the beginning of 2 Samuel, he became king. And 7 years later, he became the king of all Israel, right? So he was the king of the southern part of Israel called Judah. And then eventually became the king of the whole nation called Israel. The main reason I'm highlighting that is because that little division is going to come back to prominence again in this chapter, right? So the nation is one big old nation called Israel, but there has always been a division for some reason, and it's always been this way ever since they entered the land. There's been a division between the southern tribes and the northern tribes. The southern tribe is the southern area is mainly comprised of two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, but Benjamin is so much smaller that usually it's just called Judah, right? And then the northern area is composed of how many tribes? If only two are for the southern one, it's 10, right? So the northern one is 10 tribes, and the biggest one there is the tribe of Ephraim. And so sometimes if you move further along in the Old Testament, it's called Ephraim, right? So just remember that because it's going to come back in later on. David eventually becomes the king of all Israel, and he is spectacular. He is an amazing guy, does these amazing things. He makes it very clear that his nation is not really his nation, it's God's nation. And he moves the capital to Jerusalem. He moves the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. He wants to build a temple for God, but God says, no, that's not your job. It's going to be your son's job. But he says, as a result of your desire, I'm going to actually build a house for you. And he makes David an eternal covenant where he says that he will have a king sitting on the throne forever. And that lays the groundwork for like the Messiah, right? So that like just sets in motion the events that are going to lead eventually to Jesus. But eventually we see that David's not the best guy. Because yes, he is a great man, but he's still a man. And one day he's walking out on the roof. He sees a girl that he thinks is pretty fine. She's bathing. And he invites her over. And he sleeps with her and gets her pregnant. The issue is that she has a husband, and it's not like he was shocked to know this. He actually knew this ahead of time. He just chose to be a scoundrel. And long story short, in order to conceal his sin, he has the husband killed, and eventually he marries the girl, and it's a whole mess. Right? So he's a man after God's own heart, yet he does this horrible thing. Eventually he's called out on it, and he does repent, because he's a man after God's own heart. He repents, he gets things right with God, and God forgives him. But God says, hey dude, here's the deal. There's consequences for your actions. And the rest of David's life is going to be plagued by hardship as a result of his sin with Bathsheba. Right? And that's what we have been tracking ever since really chapter 13. That event, that was chapters 11 and 12. Chapter 13, we have been on this long epic journey, which kind of came to an end in the last chapter. Right? Because shortly after, basically in chapter 13, we hear about one of David's sons named Amnon, who was really attracted to one of David's daughters, which is inappropriate because they're siblings and you don't do that. But Amnon basically forces himself upon his sister, and then one of the other brothers named Absalom obviously didn't like this, and so he goes and he kills Amnon. It's like a Christian version of Game of Thrones. You got to keep track of all the family dynamics. It's pretty crazy. So Absalom kills Amnon, and David is upset about this because you killed your brother, and so Absalom gets banished. Eventually, David tries to reconcile things, but he takes too long to actually do that. And so Absalom is bitter against David, and eventually he leads a rebellion. And that's where we have been for the last few chapters, where basically Absalom takes over the whole land, and David has to flee. And we spent a few chapters watching David go down through the Mount of Olives, down out of Jerusalem and through the Kidron Valley and up over the Mount of Olives. And he even went across the Jordan River, and he went and started staying in the city called Mahanaim, which is the town that one of Saul's sons went and stayed at whenever he was trying to become king, right, in place of David. And so we actually see David exiled in a way because of his sin. But Absalom is still a bad dude, right? So Absalom's not great either. And this all came to a head in the last chapter where basically David, he does not want to kill his son, right? Because he realizes that all of this is a consequence of his sin. He has a lot of guilt. Yes, he knows he's right before God, but he knows that he is still responsible for everything that's happening here. And even though Absalom is guilty of all this stuff, it's still his son. And it took him a long time to realize that, but David's finally realizing, this is my son, I want to repair things. But they've gone past the point of no return. And so David's army goes out to battle, and David gives them one command. What does he say to do?
Spare the young man Absalom.
Spare the young man Absalom. He says, guys, go win the battle, but bring Absalom back home alive. That's the only thing he requests. He says, don't kill my son. However, what is the name of David's commander-in-chief? Joab. And what is our principle in regards to Joab? Don't mess with Joab. Joab is a ruthless individual. He's David's nephew, right? And the thing is, he is fiercely loyal to David. And maybe his loyalty to David is dwindling, but he's fiercely loyal to David's kingdom, I guess we could say. And he thinks he knows better than David. And he realizes, and there is credibility to what he realizes here, he realizes that there's not really a way to end this without Absalom dying. So David, as a father, is saying, don't kill Absalom. But Joab, as a commander, realizes there's not really a way to win this without Absalom dying. Does that make what Joab does correct? No, because he should have submitted to his king, right? Whatever his king says, he should listen to, because that is the anointed one, right? This is the one that God has chosen. You should submit. But Joab doesn't listen, and we saw Absalom trying to escape whenever he lost the battle, and his hair gets caught in a tree because he had this luscious locks of hair. He gets caught in a tree, and he's dangling defenseless. And some men come across him, they get Joab, and Joab plunges 3 spears into Absalom's heart. And where we ended off last week was actually with these words right here. I figured I'd put them right here just because it flows directly into the next chapter, where we actually had a man coming to report the news of Absalom's death to David. And this is what we read. Sean, could you read it for us?
The whole paragraph?
Yeah, just read the whole slide.
Okay. Behold, the Cushite arrived, and the Cushite said, Let my lord the king receive good news, for Yahweh has judged to save you this day from the hand of all those who rose up against you. Then the king said to the Cushite, "Is there peace with the young man Absalom?" And the Cushite answered, "Let the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against you for evil be as that young man." Then the king trembled and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And thus he said as he walked, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son."
All right. That's where we left off last chapter. It was kind of a depressing way to end the Bible study. Because here David has given them one command. He said, don't kill Absalom. And this guy comes back, and David says, what's the news of the battle? And he says, "Oh, my lord the king, I hope that every one of your enemies faces the same fate as that young man." AKA, he's dead. And David hears this news. He goes up to the gate and he weeps. This is very similar to something that we encountered probably almost a year ago when we started 1 Samuel. Whenever Eli, remember Eli the priest? He was waiting at the gate to hear news of his sons and to hear news of the Ark of the Covenant whenever it went out to battle. And do you remember what happened?
His sons died.
His sons died. Yes. So it's almost the same exact type of scene. You have Eli sitting there at the gate, and he sees a messenger coming, and the messenger reports, and he says, "The people have lost the battle, and moreover, your sons are dead, and moreover, the Ark of the Covenant has been lost." And then it says that when Eli heard that the Ark of the Covenant had been lost, he fell backwards and landed on his neck, and his neck snapped, basically, and he died. Because he was a heavy man. That's what it tells us. And so really, we're kind of confronted, that was at the beginning of 1 Samuel, and now we're reaching the end of this story, and there's almost like this poetry to it, to where we have to see if David's going to respond the same way. Right? Is David going to fall backwards and become dead? Is he going to be useless? And at the end of chapter 18, that's kind of how it seems. Right? David is despairing and he's wishing for death. He says, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you. Oh, my son Absalom, my son, my son." And you can imagine what David's thinking here. I mean, any father would probably wish this, right? I wish that I had died instead of my son. But especially David, whenever he realizes that a lot of these things that are happening are a direct result of his sin with Bathsheba. Right? Remember whenever Nathan confronted him and said, hey, he gave him that parable about the rich man who stole the poor man's lamb? And David said that man needs to pay fourfold for what he's done. Well, David is having to pay fourfold for what he's done. He took the life of Uriah the Hittite. And as a result, he is losing 4 sons. Right? He lost the first son whenever his first son with Bathsheba died. He lost Amnon when Absalom killed him, and now he's lost a 3rd son. Absalom is dead. David, though, the one who actually committed the sin, the one who slept with Bathsheba, the one who had Uriah killed, he was spared. And so now he's looking at Absalom, and he's hearing about the death of Absalom, and he's thinking, that should have been me. And so Absalom, I mentioned this last week, in many ways, Absalom is almost a foreshadowing of Christ, but not in a positive way. Right? Because Absalom was a horrible, villainous character who's not to be praised. But there's a lot of parallels where through his death, peace was restored to the kingdom. And through his death, we have the guilty being freed from his punishment. Right? And we even had him hanging from a tree and being pierced in the same way that Jesus hung from a tree and was pierced. So there's a lot of parallels between Absalom and Jesus, but that doesn't mean you want to be an Absalom. It just means that there's some foreshadowing going on there, ultimately. Right? But David, we ended off last chapter with him just realizing that should have been me. And his sin ultimately led to the division of his household. And what we're going to see by the end of this next chapter is that his sin ultimately leads, in many ways, to the division of the kingdom itself. And so, let's hop into this next chapter. Like I said, we're going to have to blast through this because there's 43 verses to go through, I believe. I think it's 43. So, Sean, take it away.
Okay. Then it was told to Joab, "Behold, the king is weeping and mourns for Absalom." And the salvation that day was turned to mourning for all the people. For the people heard it said that day, "The king is grieved for his son." So the people stole away to enter into the city that day, as people who are dishonored steal away when they flee in battle. But as for the king, he wrapped his face up. Then the king cried out with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" Then Joab came into the house to the king and said, "Today you have shamed the faces of all your servants, who today have provided escape for your life and for the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives and the lives of your concubines, by loving those who hate you and by hating those who love you. For you have informed all of us today that princes and servants are nothing to you. For I know this day that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, surely then it would be right in your eyes. So now, arise, go out and speak to the heart of your servants, for I swear by Yahweh, if you do not go out, surely not a man will pass the night with you. And this will be a greater evil for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now."
All right. So, there's that. What do we see happening here?
He mourns, just like he mourned for Samuel, mourned for Abner, mourned for Saul.
Yeah. This is something that we've seen consistent with David, right? David is somebody who mourns and he weeps for his enemies, right? Whenever Saul dies, he cries. Whenever Abner dies, he cries. Whenever Ishbosheth dies, he cries. David is really a good example of loving your enemies. I think this is probably the easiest example for him, though, because it's his son. And he also feels this own burden of, like, his sin is what ultimately kind of led to this. But yeah, so we do see that David, once again, weeps for his enemies. What else do we see happening here?
Joab confronts him and says, why are you weeping for your enemy? Like, well, not really your enemy, but your son who did some horrible things.
Yeah, Joab confronts David, and Joab actually raises some good points. And that should tell you that he's raising some good points, because I am one who does not like complimenting Joab. Because Joab is not the greatest guy. I think some people, like whenever you see most teachings on this, I think they overstate Joab's point, and they make it seem like Joab is clearly in the right and David is clearly in the wrong. I think it's a lot more nuanced than that, which I think is something we've consistently seen throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel, that it's not always just like a black and white correct answer. I think, if anything, what we've seen throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel is just the brokenness of society and how sometimes there is just no easy way. Like, I think that what Joab is suggesting is the better of two options, but it's really the lesser of two evils, almost. And so let's walk through it. So it was told to Joab, "Behold, the king is weeping and mourns for Absalom." So Joab hears about this. He basically hears about David's response. And for Joab, this is not a correct response. Whereas the way we left it last week is we're saying, well, yeah, obviously he's going to feel this way, right? Because we know this is his son. We know that he feels responsible for this. We know that he kind of is responsible for it partially. Yes, Absalom brought about his own undoing, but would this have all happened? Like, it's the whole, human responsibility and divine sovereignty thing. Yes, Absalom chose to do all those terrible things, but God is the one who foretold that it would happen, right? And so David feels this just guilt over everything that's happened here, but Joab hears this, and he is not a fan of David's response. And this is actually kind of sad. "And the salvation that day was turned to mourning for all the people. For the people heard it and said that day, the king is grieved for his son. So the people stole away to enter into the city that day, as people who are dishonored steal away when they flee in battle." So what do we see happening there? Not everybody all at once.
Is he trying to make a connection to when David fled previously?
I don't think so, not quite. I think what it's just communicating is actually, you just have to kind of picture it, right? This was supposed to be a day of salvation, right? If you're just picturing what's happened here. The king, who is the rightful one who belongs on the throne, had to escape, and he had to flee for his life. And he had to abandon the capital because his son had overtaken and had staged this coup. But now, the king has won. The king is going to be returning back home. This is a great day. The anointed one of God is going to be returning back to Jerusalem, and this should be a day of festivities. This should be a day of partying. But because of David's response, it's not a day of salvation anymore. The salvation that day was turned to mourning for all the people. For the people heard it and said that day, the king's grieved for his son. Right? So this should have been a day where everybody's like, yes, David's back on the throne. But instead, they hear about David's response, and they're like, oh, our king is sad. And they couldn't even celebrate in the victory because of David's mood. Right? And because David was so grieved, they couldn't even celebrate. So the people stole away to enter into the city that day as people who are dishonored steal away when they flee in battle. So even though they'd won the battle, it was almost as if they hadn't. Because rather than dancing through the streets and parading and being like, yay, victory is in Zion, they go back home and they hide. Because they don't want to be the ones who, are partying whenever David's in a bad mood. Because if David's in a bad mood about this, then they should be in a bad mood as well. Right? He's their king, and he's the anointed one. He's the man after God's own heart. And if he thinks this is a day of mourning, then by golly, I guess it's a day of mourning. And we might have thought it was a day of victory, but the king's son is dead. And I think that there is an element of correctness to this. At the same time, you can't help but also notice that there's an element of sadness to this as well, because it should have been a day of victory, but now it's depressing. Right? And so you can see both sides of it. That's what I'm trying to communicate. You can understand from both perspectives why it should be a day of celebration, but also why it's a day of sadness, because it's sadness because of the things that led to it. But Joab's going to choose one particular side. But as for the king, he wrapped his face up. Then the king cried out with a loud voice, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh Absalom, my son, my son." So you get the idea that David just doesn't care, right? He doesn't care what other people think. Everybody else is hiding away. They're respecting the king. They're just moving away, going back to their houses. And throughout the city, all they hear is David's cries. And he's weeping for his son. And he is covering his face in like a sign of mourning. And they just hear again and again. I mean, the fact that it's repeated, it tells you that this is like, you can just imagine the distraught he's going through. He almost seems like a madman, just repeating it. Absalom, 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 my son, my son, my son. Like, this is not a positive moment in David's life, right? He is just, like, this is his son. And once again, it's too little too late. This is like one of those situations where, I don't know how much death y'all have experienced in your lives. I've experienced a lot of it. And funerals are always interesting because for a few days, you get to see people really sober up. And I've been to funerals where there are family members who did not talk to each other for years. And all of a sudden, whenever death happens, they'll be friends. And like whenever my dad died, we had so many family members who showed up at the funeral, and they had not talked to my dad in years, and they're the ones who kind of instigated that separation. And they always thought there would have been a chance to reconcile. And they show up to the funeral, and they're like, well, it's too late now. We can't fix it. That's where David's at, right? He was wanting to reconcile. He told them, don't kill my son. And he was hoping that even if they lost the battle, or even if they won the battle, at least he would be able to reconcile. And they took that from him. And so now he's in this state of shock, and all he can do is go around thinking, my son, my son. Like, he never called Absalom that before. Even whenever he told them not to kill him, he simply called him the young man. He didn't say my son, right? So there was that distance. And now all he can think is, that was my baby boy. That was my son. I don't care what he did. It was my son. And so he's heartbroken. Then Joab came into the house to the king. And Joab is going to have some words for him. And he says, today you have shamed the faces of all your servants, who today have provided escape for your life and the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives and the lives of your concubines, by loving those who hate you and by hating those who love you. I tried to use my emotion there to kind of capture the inflection in Joab's voice, because I think that you can read the words and kind of catch what he's going for. What do you notice immediately about how Joab is speaking to the king?
Sounds kind of disrespectful.
It does a little bit, doesn't it? This is your king, and even if you don't agree with what he's doing, you probably should not be talking this bluntly to the king. But the thing is, Joab knows that he's like David's right-hand man. He also knows that David is in a sorrowful state where David is not going to be lashing out at people. He also knows that David is gracious and compassionate. And so what I see in Joab here is a guy who's taking advantage of the situation. And I'm not saying that all of his motives are impure. I think that Joab does make a good point in everything he says here. But where it's going to lead in this chapter and the next chapter, I think, is ultimately comparable to insurrection. Right? It seems like this is the point. And we already saw this last chapter, right? David said, do this, and Joab specifically went out of his way to disobey the king. Joab is committed to David, but it's gotten to the point where Joab seems to think that he knows how to run the nation better than David does. Right? And so the way he's talking to David here does not sound like a subject talking to a king. It sounds like, if anything, like they're like at the very least they're talking as equals. But it almost sounds like he's talking down to David. Right? Today you did this. Today you did this. He's talking down to David in David's lowly state. He's going to make a good point. I just want you to catch the inflection in what he's saying. But what is he saying to him? What is he accusing David of?
Not celebrating his victory.
Yeah. He says, David, you have a job to do. He says, I know that you're a father, and I know that you're grieving, but above all that, you are a king. And you are responsible for those people out there. And those people put their lives on the line to protect you and your kingdom. And by you responding this way, you are taking away all their celebration. You can't do that. Right? And I think that he's making a very good point. Right? The issue is, that's not natural. Right? David is a father, and yes, he might have this responsibility as a king, but you don't inherently say, oh, my son is dead, but don't worry, I'm a king, I have to be tough. That's not inherently how people just react to things, right? And so, really, Joab should have probably come up and been like, hey, man, like, I know that it's hard, but get your act together. That's not how Joab approaches it, though. Like, there's no sympathy in Joab's voice.
A little compassion.
Yes, yeah, there's no compassion, but he is making a good point. And this is something like, once again, whenever my dad died, I am not a king or anything like that, but I realized that how you react to something will dictate things. Right? For instance, like whenever I came back here, like my dad died, it was like a freak accident, and by the time I got back to this house, like we had so much family here just waiting for us, like me and my mom and stuff. It was kind of terrifying, but I realized that I was the only person who was with him when he died. And therefore, I was the only person who was actually capable of comforting the other people, because I was the only one who had the answers. And so I was like, okay, and I talked to my mom about this, because we were talking about how, like, oh man, we kind of just wanted to be alone and like grieve on our own. And I said, Mom, we'll have the rest of our lives to grieve for the next like week or so. It's our job to take care of the other people, because you know what? They're going to be sad for a week and then they'll move on with their lives. We're going to have this, like there's a time and place, right? And that was something I had to realize, and I'm not even a king, right? That was just me trying to judge things there. And I'm not even saying I handled that perfectly. I'm just saying that was kind of the thought process. That's what David needed to realize here. Yes, he is sad over this, but these people just laid down their lives for him, right? They went to battle for him, and what is the reward he gives them? He grieves whenever they lose, because they killed the person who they were fighting against to begin with, right? And so Joab's like, David, this is not how you can respond. Today you have shamed the faces of all your servants, who today provided you escape for your life and the lives of your sons and daughters. Right? You wouldn't have just lost one son if Absalom had won this battle. You would have died, your other sons would have died, all your daughters would have died. And then all the people who have been loyal to you would have died. They were coming out here to destroy everybody. Remember, that was what Hushai's advice was. Right? And Hushai was trying to lead them astray, but the advice was, wait until you have a big enough army to wipe out all of them. And so Joab says, these people fought on your behalf to keep you and all your family and your entire kingdom safe. And you are putting shame on their faces right now. They should be celebrating. They should be in the streets, partying it up. But instead, you have chosen to love those who hate you and hate those who love you. Right? Rather than congratulating the people who won that battle for you, you have chosen to mourn over the people who lost the battle. You have shown greater love towards your enemies than you have towards your friends. That's really the issue that David's facing here, right? Because we are called to love our enemies. But he is showing greater love to his enemy than his own friends. That's the problem. For you have informed all of us today. You notice the repetition of the word today. Like, once again, lack of compassion. Because the idea is that this is the same exact day that all this stuff happened. Right? Like, I would understand this if, like, months had passed, and it's like, hey, David, get your act together. But apparently this is the same exact day. And Joab's like, dude, get over it. Your son is dead. I'm like, dude, a little compassion would be nice. For you have informed all of us today that princes and servants are nothing to you. For I know this day that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, surely then it would be right in your eyes. So what does he say there?
He's saying that if Absalom was alive, then he'd be happy and things would be okay.
Yeah, because he says, David, I can tell you right now by how you're reacting, if the roles were reversed, and if we had lost the battle, and if all of us died, you probably wouldn't be nearly this sad as long as Absalom was alive. And that is despicable. That is messed up. Because you're saying that you care more about the one son who rebelled against you than all the other people who were loyal to you and who would have laid down their lives for you. Which is interesting, right? And this is why I'm saying Joab does have a good point. This actually reinforces something that Jesus says later on. Remember that story whenever Jesus' family is trying to come find him? And they're saying, hey, we want to hang out with Jesus. Actually, they weren't wanting to hang out with him. They wanted to take him back home because they thought he was crazy. But they basically come and they're looking for Jesus, and Jesus is in a crowded room. And they say, hey, your mother and your brothers and sisters are looking for you. And what does Jesus say? Who are my mother and my brother and my sisters? But those who do the will of God. Right? He says, those are my mother, brother, and sisters. He says, blood relationships, that's nothing. Right? Those people, they're currently trying to take me away because they reject me. And so Jesus actually rejects his blood relationship. And he says that the more important family is actually the people who share the same allegiance as you. Specifically, allegiance to God. And so Joab is actually making that same exact point. He says, David, you're valuing blood relationship over devotion. Right? The reason these people were willing to lay down their lives is because they knew that you were God's anointed one. They're devoted to you because you belong to Yahweh. And you're mourning over this blood relationship when all these other people are more family to you than Absalom ever was. And so what Joab's saying is good, it's just not compassionate, right? So I just want to distinguish that, because sometimes you can say the right thing and just say it the wrong way. And I think that goes both to Joab and to David, right? Probably if it comes to just application for what we can learn from this, we need to ask ourselves, how are people going to perceive our actions? Right? That's something we probably need to be considering. It's not just enough to say, like, what is the right thing to do? How do I do it in a way where people will best understand what I'm trying to do? And that's not saying you can always control how people perceive things. It's just to say, we should be mindful of that, right? Because I don't think David was trying to send that message, right? David was simply a father grieving as a father who had a temporary lapse in judgment and forgot he was also a king, right? But he couldn't, that was a fatal mistake, right? You can't manage to forget that. That lapse in judgment is what's going to cost him. And so we need to be aware of that. Like, how are people perceiving the things that we're doing? Is it right to mourn as a father? Absolutely. But you need to be mindful of how you're doing that, because other people might view it as you hating them. And here they did all this stuff for you, and you're actually punishing them for what they've done, right? They're saying, we just fought for you, and our reward is that you almost hate us for delivering you from battle. It's really confusing.
They feel ashamed to celebrate.
Exactly. Yeah, they feel ashamed over the victory that they fought on his behalf. And so you just have to be mindful of things like that, because what David's doing makes logical sense, and it's even appropriate to an extent. But it's sending the wrong message. And that's really what Joab's getting onto him about. So now, arise. He's literally commanding the king, which it's like, Joab, you're not his advisor, you're his commander, right? You're supposed to do what he says to do, not command him. So now, arise, go out and speak to the heart of your servants. The word heart, every time it shows up in 1 and 2 Samuel, it's important to just pay attention to. All right, go and speak to the heart of your servants. For I swear by Yahweh, if you do not go out, surely not a man will pass the night with you. And this will be of the greater evil for you than all the evil that has come upon you from your youth until now. So what does he say is going to happen if he doesn't go out there?
It's going to be worse than you were off.
Yeah. He's going to say you're going to be worse off. Because guess what? A lot of the people, they didn't even know what they were doing when they followed Absalom. Some of them were just confused. They didn't even know that this was a coup. They just thought that he was appointed. Right? Absalom didn't have everybody following him. He just had some people. But if you respond this way, you're sending a clear message on how you treat people who love you. And you are showing no gratitude. So you better go out there and you better kiss some babies on the forehead and you better make some people happy. Because if you don't do that, the kingdom will be lost to you. And I agree with Joab, right? This is, like, David does need to do this. I just think that Joab probably needs to control how he's saying it. At the same time, there is a time and place for tough love, right? And maybe if he had been more compassionate, David wouldn't have listened. I don't know. I think I would probably take the compassionate approach first, and then if that doesn't work, do the tough love approach. I just think that that's not in line with Joab's character. At this point, Joab's just fed up. And Joab is saying, like, basically he's like, you're an old senile, like you're a senile old man. You don't know how to run this country anymore. And it seems like there's an underlying threat to this, to where he's saying it'll be of greater evil to you whenever the people rebel against you. The question is, well, who's going to be leading that rebellion? And I think there might be an underlying notion of, if you don't get out there and do something, somebody's going to have to step up. And that's going to be worse for you. So there might be an underlying threat where he's saying, somebody's got to lead. I'm not saying who, but somebody's got to do it. And I'm just telling you that I know how to lead better than you do right now. Right? And so David's going to take his advice, which is good. David, like, that's another good thing about David. Even though he's king, he is still willing to, like, listen to advice, even from somebody who is being insolent and insubordinate like Joab here. This is his nephew. Like I do like that about David. But let's move on because, like I said, we have a lot to cover. Take it away, Sean. Just read the whole slide.
Okay. So the king arose and sat in the gate. And they told all the people, saying, Behold, the king is sitting in the gate. Then all the people came before the king. Now Israel had fled, each to his tent. And it happened that all the people were disputing throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies and provided us escape from the hand of the Philistines. But now he has fled out of the land from Absalom. However, Absalom, whom we anointed over us, has died in battle. So now, why are you silent about having the king return? Now King David had sent to Zadok about Abiathar the priest, saying, Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, Why are you the last to have the king return to his house, while the word of all Israel has come to the king, even to his house? You are my brothers, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to have the king return? And say to Amasa, Are you not my bone and my flesh? May God do so to me, and more also, if you will not be commander of the army before me continually in place of Joab. Thus he inclined the hearts of all the men of Judah as one man. So they sent word to the king, saying, Return, you and all your servants. The king then returned and came as far as the Jordan. And Judah came to Gilgal in order to meet the king, to cause the king to pass over across the Jordan.
Perfect. All right. So now we see David begin his return. Right? He's leaving Mahanaim, and he is slowly coming back to the Jordan River. He's going to go across. He's going to go to Gilgal and eventually make his way back to Jerusalem. So the king arose and sat in the gate. So we see that he listens to what Joab says, right? Joab's like, hey man, you need to go out before the people. And where is it that you go if you're wanting to be before the people?
At the gate.
You go to the gate, right? So he goes, he sits at the gate, and they told all the people saying, Behold, the king is sitting in the gate. Then all the people came before the king, right? So basically, everybody gets the message, hey, the king's out here, he's ready to party. And so David's basically, he's having to put on a face right now, right? He's having to act in a way that is contrary to his feelings, right? He feels sad, and he feels really distraught over this, but he's having to choose to be tough and having to choose to, be the man that the people need him to be. And he needs to respond in a manner of gratitude, and he has to thank the people. And so he goes out there, he sits before the gate, and all the people come to him, and he gets to express his gratitude to them. And I imagine he probably was honest with them, because that just seems like the type of guy David is. He was probably like, guys, I'm sorry, I didn't respond how I should have responded. You got to understand where I'm coming from. That was my son, but thank y'all so much. Like, you can almost imagine how the conversation went. But now, the question becomes, how is everybody else going to respond to this? Because there are some people who fled with David, and they went with him, and they supported him during all this, and they're the victors. But then there's all the other people back home who supported Absalom, and they lost. And so now the question becomes, well, that didn't work, and now David's king, how do we handle this? Like, do we rebel further? Do we welcome him back as if nothing ever happened? Should we just stay in our spots and like wait? Like, I don't know. Like, that's basically the next thing that they have to wrestle through. So Israel had fled each to his tent, right? Israel being the people who had supported Absalom, right? So they all flee to their tents. They're like, oh, crud, we lost the battle. They go back to their tents. And it happened that all the people were disputing throughout all the tribes of Israel, right? And what are they disputing about? Well, they're saying, the king delivered us from the hand of our enemies. When it says the king, who's it talking about? David, right? So they're saying David delivered us from the hand of our enemies and provided us escape from the hand of the Philistines. But now he's fled from the land from Absalom. Okay, so what are they saying about David there?
He fled from Absalom.
Yeah, but what's the first thing they say?
He provided for us. You know, he protected us from our enemies, the Philistines.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're saying, well, on one hand, David was an amazing king. And he did some really cool stuff for us. I mean, he delivered us from all of our enemies. And then, I mean, he just went through some really tough stuff because he had to flee from his own son, Absalom, and he went on the run. So this amazing king who did all these amazing things for him, and we owe him all of our devotion, he went on the run, and he's been going through some major stuff. And we probably should welcome him back with open arms, right? That's the mindset, right? This is what they're disputing about. Because they're like, this guy deserves all of our devotion and everything, and he's been on the run, and so we should probably be the first ones to just go back there and welcome him and say, welcome back. But here's the issue. You go on to verse 10. However, Absalom, whom we anointed over us, died in battle. The reason he fled is because we anointed the son, right? That's the caveat, right? It's not like, oh, look, David was run off by some other enemy. They're like, yeah, no, we're the reason why he fled. And so their question is like, well, if we go out there and like welcome him back, who's to say he won't just like kill us? I mean, we're the ones who anointed his son over there. And the guy that we anointed, the guy that we chose to replace him, he can't defend us now. Turns out that David was the more powerful one. So they're really having a difficult time trying to figure out like how exactly do we respond to this situation. It's almost like they probably should have just supported David from the beginning and not rebel against the Lord's anointed one. Okay, so Absalom died in battle, so now why are you silent about having the king return? So this is the debate going on in the tents, where some people are like, we should go out there and we should go to David and we should say, King, we are sorry, we made a big boo-boo, please forgive us. And then other ones are like, you know, maybe just like, we just hang out in our tents and just wait, and, like, let's just wait it out and see what happens, right? And so people are debating about this, trying to figure out what's the appropriate way to respond. And once again, I'm not going to suggest there is an appropriate way, because they did this to themselves, right? Like, they dug their own graves, and now it's like, oh, let's just... I think probably the best things to do is to wait it out, right? Because also you have to realize that there's even more complexity to this, because they had many friends who died in battle, right? Because they lost this battle. And so if they go out and they act like, oh, yay, David's the king again, and they celebrate, they're doing the same thing that David just did, right? And they're turning a day of mourning into a day of celebration. And so it's really just they're in a tough situation. Yeah, they shouldn't have done this. They should have just supported David the whole way through. And so they don't know what to do. And then now we come back to David, right? Let's see what David's going to do. Because they're just over there. Now, King David had sent to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, right? Those are the guys you remember that they were like his spies inside Jerusalem whenever he left, right? He sent to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, saying, speak to the elders of Judah, saying, why are you the last to have the king return to his house, while the word of all Israel has come to the king, even to his house? You are my brothers. You are my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to have the king return? So what does David say to Abiathar and Zadok?
mean by bone and flesh?
Okay, so let's maybe take a step back real quick. So we just talked about the people of Israel, right? And remember how I emphasized there was like a division kind of going on? That's going to be emphasized again. So the people of Israel are one group of people. Those are the ones who supported Absalom. Who is the other group of people? Who was David king over before he was king over all Israel? Judah, right? The southern two tribes. What tribe is David from? Judah. Jerusalem is, remember, it's on the edge of two tribes, Benjamin and Judah, right? Which is, like, those are the two tribes that comprise the land of Judah. So, he sends message to the priests in Jerusalem. So, what group of people is this? The people of Judah. David is from the tribe of Judah. Okay? And so, he is saying, why are you the last to have the king return to his house while the word of all Israel has come to the king? So the word of Israel has come to the king. He is hearing reports of what these guys are doing. All these guys are saying, hey, we supported Absalom, but some of us are tempted to go like, welcome David back. Well, David sends a message to Zadok and them in Jerusalem, and he says, hey, where's y'all's welcome party? Right? You are my brothers. You're my bone and my flesh. Why then should you be the last to have the king return? What is he asking them?
I haven't heard anything from you guys yet.
Yeah. He's like, guys, y'all are like my actual supporters. Like, I'm from your tribe. You're my family. Like, I hear that the people of Israel are trying to figure out what to do with me, and some of them are staying back, and some of them want to come here. Why haven't y'all said anything? And he's basically inviting them, and he's saying, like, come show your support for me. Welcome me back. There's an issue to this, though, right? I don't think, David doesn't have any weird motivations to this, but it's going to send a mixed signal. Because if you go back to how Absalom established his coup, do you remember what he kind of did? Like how he won the hearts of the people?
He went to the gate.
He went to the gate, and remember how people would like bring their things before him, and he would almost present it as if David was showing favoritism to the people of Judah? Remember how he would be like, oh, yeah, Dad doesn't answer all this. He only takes like the important ones that kind of are more relatable to him. And it seemed like he was presenting it like David was showing favoritism to his own tribe, right? And he would hear the stuff that came from Judah and not as much from the people of Israel. And so Absalom planted that seed, and David doesn't actually feel that way. But this is not going to help that, because now it seems like David is showing favoritism, when really he's just like being like, guys, y'all are family. Y'all should be the ones like getting here sooner than everybody else. But we're going to see how this ultimately is going to lead to further division in a little bit. I don't think David's doing anything inherently wrong. It just probably isn't the wisest move in light of what Absalom had already done, right? Because Absalom planted the seeds of doubt in people, and David, once again, it's about, like it's almost like a consistent theme. It's not just about doing things, it's about understanding how things might be perceived, right? What he's doing isn't inherently wrong or sinful, but it's going to be perceived as a certain way from certain people, right? The people of Israel are going to see this, and it seems like David is allying himself and showing favoritism to the people of Judah. And that's going to cause division. So, he says, hey guys, y'all should be the ones coming and supporting me. And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? May God do so to me, and more also, if you will not be commander of the army before me continually in place of Joab. Okay, who's Amasa?
The commander of the Absalom.
The commander of Absalom's army. And what is David saying to this guy?
Are you not my bone and flesh?
Well, yeah,
Related,
so
right?
they're related, yeah. So he's he's David's nephew, right? Okay, so they are bone and flesh. They're related to each other. And what does he offer him?
To be commander-in-chief of the army instead of Joab.
In place of Joab. Why might David not want Joab as his commander-in-chief anymore?
Because he didn't do what he said.
Insubordination. Yeah, I gave you one command. Don't kill my son. You went and killed my son. You're no longer allowed to be the commander-in-chief of this army. Right? And he's probably like, David is still very wise. He sees what Joab is doing, and he perceives the fact that Joab is no longer responding how a commander should probably respond. And David also sees an opportunity. Because what message does this send? Right? First off, who was Amasa the commander-in-chief of?
The enemy.
The enemy's army.
Yeah.
And so, who should be the first person that David kills?
Him.
Amasa. right? You are the one who led the army against me. But instead, what does David choose to do?
To have him be the commander of the army.
He elevates him. What message does this send? What type of leaders does this show David to be?
Good leader.
Forgiving. He's gracious. Let bygones be bygones. I recognize talent, and you've got talent in leading an army. Yes, that army might have been facing against my army, and you might have been opposing me, but you're still a good commander. And so he forgives him, and he elevates him. This is cool. Like, this is gospel-type stuff right here, right? He is looking at his enemy, and he is appointing him a position in his kingdom. This is exactly what God's going to do for us, right? We were sinners who rebelled against him, yet he is going to give us a place in his kingdom, and he's going to elevate us and exalt us, right? That's what David's doing. So this is a really cool moment right here, but who's not going to like this? Joab. And what's our principle about Joab?
You don't screw with Joab.
Don't mess with Joab. So just keep this in the back of your head. Do you think Joab likes Amasa?
No.
So what do you think is probably going to happen to Amasa?
Probably gonna get killed.
By who?
Joab.
Yeah, there's a reason I told y'all that's a principle to remember. Because, yeah, just wait till next week. So, just keep that in the back of your head. All right.
Okay.
Thus, he inclined the hearts of all the men of Judah as one man, so they sent word to the king saying, return you and all your servants. Right? So, with these words, David basically said, guys, y'all are my family. And you get the idea that he's also just trying to remind them that, like, he's even forgiving them too. Because, yes, they might be the ones who are more inclined to support him, but a lot of them still supported Absalom. I mean, remember, Absalom was coronated and he had the crown put on his head in Hebron, which is a town of Judah. Right? And so this is David's giving them the olive branch. He says, guys, hey, we have a rough past. I get it. Y'all are still family. Y'all should be the first ones getting over here to welcome me back. Israel, I get why they don't want to, because they don't have that connection we got. Get over here. And they're like, so we're still friends? And he's like, yeah, we're still friends. They're like, all right, come on back. And so the king then returned and came as far as the Jordan, right? So you've got him and all of his people coming back, and they go to the Jordan River, right? This is an exciting moment, right? Because we've talked about how David kind of almost represents all of Israel in many ways, right? And so he had been exiled from the land. But now it's almost like Joshua with the 12 tribes about to cross the Jordan River. And do you know what the first city that they went to after they crossed the Jordan River was?
Jericho.
That's the first city they conquered. What's the first city they camped at? They built the city.
Gilgal?
Gilgal. The king returned and came as far as the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal in order to go meet the king, to cause the king to pass over across the Jordan. So we literally have David repeating the steps of Israel, right? He's crossing the Jordan and he's going to Gilgal, right? And eventually he's going to make his way to Jerusalem. All right, moving onwards. Take it away, Sean.
Okay. Then Shimei the son of Gera, the Benjaminite, who was from Bahurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. Now there were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, with Ziba the young man of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him. And they rushed to the Jordan before the king. Then they kept passing over the ford to cause the king's household to pass over, and do what was good in his sight. And Shimei the son of Gera fell down before the king as he was about to pass over the Jordan. So he said to the king, let not my lord consider me guilty, nor remember what your servant did wrong on the day when my lord the king went out from Jerusalem, so that the king would take it to heart. For your servant knows I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come today, the first of all the house of Joseph, to go down to meet my lord the king. But Abishai the son of Zeruiah said, should not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the anointed of Yahweh? David then said, What have I to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah, that you should this day be an adversary to me? Should any man be put to death in Israel today? For I do not know that I am king over Israel today. Do I not know that I am king over Israel today? And the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. Thus the king swore to him.
Perfect. Good old Shimei makes his return. You'll notice that this, basically the rest of this chapter is going to be an exact reversal of what we saw whenever David exited Jerusalem. Right? So whenever he exited, you'll remember that he came across Hushai. Right? And Hushai was this elderly man who wanted to support David. And David said, you'd be a burden to me. It's better for you to stay in Jerusalem. And then he came across Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth. Right? And then he came across Shimei. Now what we're going to do is we're reversing that. he's going to come across Shimei, and then he's going to come across Ziba and Mephibosheth, and then he's going to come across another guy who is not Hushai, but has very similarities. He's an old guy who wants to support David, right? And so it's an exact reversal, which is good, because whenever he was leaving, we noticed with each of those, the opposition was growing more and more severe, and it was a moment of sadness. But if it's being reversed, that means the opposition is growing less and less severe, and it's a moment of exaltation, right? So there's an emotional weight to this, which is cool. But who was Shimei?
He's the guy that cursed David.
Yeah!
When he was going out of Jerusalem.
Yeah, remember whenever David made it to this one
Just throwing
city?
rocks at.
Yeah, this dude was like, hey, you're terrible, you suck. And he's like just throwing rocks at David. He's like, you're the worst, I hated you, you deserve to die, you deserve what's coming after you. And remember Abishai, the brother of Joab, was like, should I kill him? Which, according to the law, he could, because this dude is cursing the anointed one of God, and he should be killed. But David says, you know what, no, maybe I could learn from this. Maybe God appointed him to curse me, right? And so, that's a thing, right? So Shimei was horrible, but here's the deal. Shimei said all that stuff because he thought that there was no chance David was ever going to like make a comeback, right? This is like, he's basically hitting David when he's down. He was like, oh yeah, you're just an old man. You're not going to come back from this. And now, Absalom's dead, and David's returning to his kingdom, and Shimei's like, oh, crud. I need to apologize. Did I say all that stuff earlier? I didn't mean it. I was just joking with you. Those rocks I threw, I was just trying to remind you that David and Goliath thing. Remember you threw the rocks? I was just playing with you. Like, he's basically just trying to like downplay everything. And he's be like, yeah, my bad. Please forgive me. Sorry. Don't kill me. Because originally David was compassionate. He thinks like, oh, maybe David was compassionate because like he was sad. But now David's back. And he's victorious, and maybe he's out for blood. Yikes. Alright, so Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite, who was from Bahurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. Right? So he hears that the people of Judah are coming, and he's like, not before me. Like, he wants to be the first person to prostrate himself before David, because he's like, he needs to suck up. This is like hardcore brown-nosing. He's like, I want to be the first person to welcome you back, King. He was the last person to curse him, and he's like, I've been doing lots of thinking. I'm so sorry. Now, there were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him. So he comes with an entourage, right? And you have to realize this is like the house of Saul, right? Like, that's the tribe of Benjamin, right? Now, there were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, with Ziba, the young man of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him. And they rushed to the Jordan before the king. So they're getting there before the people of Judah even get there. Right? They're just hurrying over there because they see their opportunity. Right? They want to be the first ones to welcome the king back into the land. Right? Oh, hey, it's me, your old pal Shimei. Hope you're doing well. So glad you're back. Welcome back. Let's start singing the song. Then they kept passing over the ford to cause the king's household to pass over. Right? So it seems like they're stepping in the way to like help usher them in. They're like, oh, let me give you a hand. Let me walk you over. And to do what was good in his sight, they're sucking up to him. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to pass over the Jordan. Right? So he's like, before you enter back into your domain, O king, I have some words I would like to say. So he's like rushing across the Jordan River, bowing down before David. And so he said to the king, let not my lord consider me guilty, nor remember what your servant did wrong on the day when my lord the king went out from Jerusalem, so that the king would take it to heart. For your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come today, the first of all the house of Joseph, to go down to meet my lord the king. So, what's he say?
He's trying to make things right with David because of, what he did to him as he was going out of Jerusalem.
Yeah. Is there any genuine repentance here?
Not really.
I mean, it's hard to tell, but I would err towards the side of no, because we saw no sign of remorse when he was doing it. Even whenever David was compassionate to him, remember it said that he kept following and throwing rocks? This is due to literally, he's just trying to save face. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. Do we expect anything different? He's just like Saul, right? That's exactly what Saul would always do. He sees David coming across. He's like, oh, crud. I never thought I'd see that face coming across the Jordan River again. He's like, dude, I am so sorry. I'm gonna be honest with you. That was a big L for me. I screwed up. That's my bad. And I'm guilty, but I'm asking that you don't hold me guilty. Please. Because I'd really like to not. And if you want to understand, like if you want to see how genuinely repentant I am, look at me. I'm the first one of the whole house of Joseph to come and bow down before you. Notice he doesn't say the house of Israel. So one reason he calls it the house of Joseph is because, like I said, the biggest tribe of that area was the tribe of Ephraim, which was one of the sons of Joseph. But why else might he bring up the name Joseph right now? Whenever you think of Joseph in Genesis, like what is probably one of like the main words that you think of when it comes to character traits?
Like servant.
Servant.
Long suffering.
Long-suffering. The word I think of is the word forgiveness. Because remember how he had some brothers who sold him into slavery?
Yeah.
And whenever he encountered those brothers again, he forgave them. And he said, what the enemy meant for evil, God intended for good. I think Shimei's like, hey man, I'm the first of the house of Joseph to be here. Remember? Joseph forgave the people who mocked and ridiculed him and brought hardship upon him. I'm the first of his house to be here before you. I can use some forgiveness right now. But also, I don't know. Like, this dude, I just don't like Shimei. Like, I'm just going to be honest with you. This dude just he just annoys me. Because he's just trying to justify himself by his actions. We know people like this. They're like, ooh, look, if you want to know how sincere I am, I'm the first one here. That means nothing. Right? You being the first one here? Yeah, no. Where were you when I needed you? You were the one throwing rocks at me. Right? Like, now you're just sucking up. Right? And so, I might be tempted to respond like Abishai. But that's not necessarily a good thing for me. Right? I'm not nearly as gracious as David, and I'm working on it. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said, should not Shimei be put to death for this? Because he cursed the anointed of Yahweh? The word anointed, once again, in Hebrew is Mashiach. Right? He cursed the Messiah of Yahweh. According to the law, yeah. He should be killed. Yeah, absolutely. He deserves to die. That should not be tolerated. David then said, what have I to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah, that you should this day be an adversary to me? You know what the word for adversary is in Hebrew? Satan, right? Satan. That you should be a Satan to me. Should any man be put to death in Israel today? For do I not know that I am king over Israel this day? He's like, guys, what do I have to prove? Right? Like, what benefit would it, like, he got on him about this before. Remember, Abishai said the same thing whenever Shimei cursed him for the first time. Abishai spoke up and was like, hey, we should kill him for what he did. And David's like, no. Maybe God told him to say this. I don't know. Like, just move on. Like, it's just words, right? We'll just get over it. And then now David's coming back, and Abishai's like, well, according to the law, we should kill him. And David's like, but what would be the point? Like, what message are we sending? Like, I'm king. Everybody knows I'm king. We're not accomplishing anything other than just bloodshed. Like, it's not like Shimei's learning a lesson from that. Like, if anything, or just being more of a tyrant. No, just whatever. Like, get over it. But who does he say that, like, he says, what have I to do with you? Who?
Sons of Zeruiah.
Who's he referring to? Who are the sons of Zeruiah?
Him and Joab.
Abishai and Joab, right? Joab's probably like over here like, what did I do? You know what you did, right? So Abishai is doing something here, and Zeruiah is David's sister, right? Because both Abishai and Joab are his nephews. And so he's like, oh, sons of Zeruiah, y'all are driving me insane. And he said the same thing whenever they were leaving. So it's just a perfect parallel, right? David's like, y'all are literally driving me bonkers, right? My sister's sons are the most annoying people in the world. Y'all are just so bloodthirsty, and you just want to kill people, and it drives me nuts. Because David, he knows how to kill people, right? He is a warrior. But that's not the thing that, like, gets him going, right? He kills people if he has to. He's not just, like, out for blood all the time. And so he turns to these guys, like, stop. Like, this is a day of victory. Nobody else needs to die today, right? Joab, you already killed my son. Abishai, you don't need to kill my enemy, right? We're done. It's all right. Just move on. We'll get over this. Just keep moving forward. Should any man be put to death in Israel today, for I do not know that do I not know that I'm king over Israel today? Like, God made me a promise. I'm still king. Just keep moving on. This guy's not worth the trouble. And the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. Thus the king swore to him. Partial truth. He's not going to be the one to kill Shimei, but on his deathbed, at the beginning of 1 Kings, David's going to call over Solomon and be like, hey, there's this dude named Shimei. He did me dirty. You're a wise guy. You decide what to do with it. And then David dies. So we'll get to that whenever we're in 1 Kings. But sorry, I'm trying to go through this a bit quicker because I realize that we're 23 verses in and we've got like 30 minutes left. So I'm trying to blast us through it. All right. Take it away, Sean.
Now Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, had come down to meet the king. And he had not done anything for his feet, nor done anything for his mustache, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he came home in peace. Now it happened, when he came down from Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said to him, Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? So he answered, O my lord the king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself that I may ride on it and go with the king, because your servant is lame. Moreover, he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of God, therefore do what is good in your sight. For all my father's household was nothing but men worthy of death before my lord the king. Yet you set your servant among those who ate at your own table. What right do I have yet that I should complain any more to the king? So the king said to him, Why do you still speak of your affairs? I have decided you and Ziba shall divide the land. And Mephibosheth said to the king, Let him even take it all, since my lord the king has come in peace to his own house.
Nice. I love David at the end. He's like, dude, I needed a shorter explanation of that. Like, you're good. Just stop talking. Yeah, so what do we see happen here? I told y'all about this a few weeks ago. That this was going to happen. Oh, look who it is. Could you go get the door for Adam?
Hey, buddy.
What's up? How are you?
Good. It's about time you showed up.
Hey guys.
Ew.
A little late.
Hi.
You sitting here?
Take a seat. That's
Okay.
yours. All right, so what do we see happening here?
I can pronounce that name.
Mephibosheth.
Whatever. I can get that. His servant deceived him,
Yeah.
and he didn't even want his land anymore. He just came to your home, so that's all that matters.
Yeah, so this was the second encounter we saw remember a few chapters ago, whenever David was leaving Jerusalem, and he encounters Ziba. And you remember, like, there's this whole, like, this is, like, a lot of chapters ago. Remember how David was like, hey, I want to show loving kindness to a member of Saul's household. And there was only one member of Saul's household left, and it was Mephibosheth. And he was, like, this crippled son of Jonathan, right? And David's like, okay, cool. And he gave Mephibosheth all this land, he gave him all this stuff, and he even said, you can even eat at my table from now on. And it was actually really cool. Well, whenever David was fleeing from Absalom, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, comes out there and says, hey, king, man, I'm so sorry, but Mephibosheth decided to support Absalom. And I tried to talk him out of it, but I don't know what to do. And David was like, okay, well, I guess that you get all of his stuff now. And I told y'all then that Ziba was a cotton-picking liar who couldn't be trusted. And that's exactly what we see right here. Right? So David is returning to Jerusalem, and Mephibosheth shows up, and he says, so my servant lied to you. I was still faithful to you. I'm just crippled, and so I literally couldn't flee for myself. He just, like, took off without me. And it's kind of messed up. And so, basically, this is Mephibosheth trying to fix that whole situation. Now, let's walk through it. Now Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, had come down to meet the king, and he had not done anything for his feet, nor done anything for his mustache, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he came home in peace. That sounds really nasty and disgusting, but what does it suggest about Mephibosheth? If he's not bathing and he's not trimming his beard and stuff, what does that say about him?
Not good with personal hygiene.
He wasn't having a good time.
He wasn't having a good time. Yes, yes. So I mean, I guess you could come to the conclusion on the hygiene thing, but there's something more being communicated here. He was depressed. He was in a state of mourning, right? Like this is like him saying, "I am in such a state of distress. I am not going to take care of myself until my king has come back." Right? He's in a state of grief, in a state of mourning, which runs contrary to what Ziba had said. Ziba had said, "Hey, now that you're getting out of the city," Mephibosheth thought that it was his time to take over, and he decided to ally himself with Absalom. Right? But Mephibosheth hasn't been doing that. No, he's been back in Jerusalem mourning, and he's been grieving, and he's like, "I'm not going to bathe until like David comes back home." And he's probably got people in his household like, well, "Could you bathe a little bit?" And he's like, "No." And they're like, "All right, we need to get David back home because this is not great." Now it happened when he came from Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said to him, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" Right? Because the last thing David heard is that Mephibosheth had betrayed him. And you've got to keep in mind that David was being betrayed by a lot of people here. Right? One of his closest counselors had betrayed him and had become a counselor for Absalom. And a bunch of the people left him. And so he thought that Mephibosheth actually had. And he's like, "That's pretty jacked up, man. Like, I gave you all this stuff and you just abandoned me. Like, why didn't you go with me?" So he answered, "Oh, my lord, the king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, 'I will saddle a donkey for myself that I may ride on it and go with the king, because your servant is lame.'" And once again, when it's using the word lame here, it's not using it how we typically use it. It's talking about the fact that he can't use his legs. All right. "Moreover, he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like the angel of God, the messenger of God. Therefore do what is good in your sight." So what does he say happened?
He can't get up and go with them. He can't use his legs.
Yeah, he says, "Whenever I heard that you were leaving, I wanted to get my horse saddled, and I was ready to go. I was going to go right behind you. I was wanting to go with you. But my servant deceived me," because he couldn't saddle it himself, right? Because he's crippled. He couldn't do all that stuff himself, so he asked his servant to do it. His servant said he was going to go do it, and then his servant just left without him. Because Ziba saw his opportunity, and he went for it. He was like, "Ooh, if I go, deceive David, maybe I can get away, and I can get all of the stuff that belonged to Mephibosheth." And David kind of fell for it, right? Because once again, David was not thinking, David was on the run. It's not like he was like, we need to sit out and debate about this. Let's have a council. No, David was like, "Okay, if Mephibosheth betrayed me, you can have all the stuff," right? He just handled it out. But he's like, "No, my servant deceived me. He said he was going to go get the saddle ready, and he just ditched me. Moreover, he has slandered your servant to my lord the king, but my lord the king is like the angel of God." Do you see what he keeps calling David? My lord the king, my lord the king, my lord the king. He's showing his devotion. But my lord the king is like the angel of God. Therefore, do what's good in your sight. Contrast this by the last guy, Shimei. What was Shimei saying?
Please forgive me.
Yeah, he was coming up with all these demands. He's like, "Hey, forgive me. Don't hold anything against me. Just, maybe things would be..." He showed up and he was telling David what to do. Whereas Mephibosheth isn't trying to earn anything from David. He's just showing up being like, "Hey, I just want to make sure we're good. My servant said a lot of bad stuff about me, and he made it seem like I wasn't devoted to you. I just wanted to let you know that I am devoted to you. You can do whatever you think is good in your eyes. I just wanted to make sure that we're good. For all my father's household was nothing but men. For all my father's household was nothing but men worthy of death before my lord the king. Yet you set your servant among those who ate at your own table. What right do I have yet that I should complain any more to the king?" So what does he say there?
I just got here.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that he's saying that he owes everything to him for what he's been given, so he has no room to complain and fight for getting it back type thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like the whole the Lord gives, the Lord takes away, right? He says I was nothing before you came into my life, right? Because remember, before David decided to show him kindness, he was living in some random hut, not even in the land of Israel, right? And then David brought him in, and he's like, you had the right to give it away to my servant, and so I'm not even asking you to give that stuff back to me. Like, you can do whatever is right in your own eyes. I just want to make sure we're good, because we were nothing. Like all of my men, we deserve death because he was from the household of Saul, who was opposed to David, and who was constantly trying to kill David. And so if David was any other person, he would have immediately wiped out all of Saul's household. But instead, because David's a man after God's own heart, he showed kindness to Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth's like, how could I ever betray you? Like, no, I am so grateful for what you've done for me. And I'm not even complaining right now. I just wanted to make sure that we're good. I'm not even asking you for anything. I just want to, like, make sure we're still bros. That's, like, the main thing. He's just like, I just want to make sure that we're on, like, I can't stand the idea of you thinking that I would betray you. That's really what he's getting across. I don't want you to think that I would ever do that. I have not forgotten where I came from. I have not forgotten what you have made me to be. Right? Which is really cool, because once again, you see that kind of foreshadowing of how, like, David is kind of a picture of Jesus. Right? Because that's how we should be responding to Jesus, right? We shouldn't forget who we were and that we're deserving of death, yet he has given us all these things. And whenever we choose to sin, it's usually because we lose sight of that. Right? And Mephibosheth's like, how could I? Right? I was nothing, and you gave me everything. Which is exactly what Hesed is, right? Loving kindness. It's giving everything to somebody who is entitled to nothing. So he says, what right do I have yet that I should complain any more to the king? He's like, I shouldn't even keep talking. So the king said to him, why do you still speak of your affairs? I've decided you and Ziba shall divide the land. Okay, so that's a weird choice. What does David say there? What is his conclusion? What is his judgment?
Is he giving the land to Mephibosheth and Ziba?
Yeah, splitting it 50-50. Well, that's kind of weird. Why would he do that? Why not just give it all to Mephibosheth?
Could it be just to try to honor like a decision he's already made, or?
I think there's an element of that. I think part of it is him honoring his word to Ziba. He doesn't want to just like revoke it, even though Ziba was kind of a trash bag. But what else? Trying to get us to think through this.
So his Ziba's family can live off the land too.
Okay, so yeah, to not just like
Yeah.
have Ziba's entire family get punished for what Ziba did. That's possible. But there's also, beyond this, just a bunch of different probable reasons. First off, the whole reason this happened is because he was quick to judgment. And so maybe he doesn't want to do the exact reverse and be like, oh, sure, you know what, all goes back to you, Mephibosheth. And then it turns out that Mephibosheth was actually the liar the whole time. David's probably, like, he's learning from that. But I think there's even something deeper here. And I think the best way to learn from this is actually to jump forward in time to David's son, Solomon. Do y'all remember the story about Solomon and the two women with the baby?
Oh yeah.
Yeah? You remember how there was, like, basically these two women had these two babies, and one woman accidentally crushed her baby in the middle of the night unless she rolled over on top of it.
Oh.
And then they started fighting over the same baby, and they both claimed that that baby was theirs. What did Solomon do?
He said basically like, we'll kill the baby, and the one that like actually cared was the one that was the mom.
Well, yeah, because he was like, how about this? We'll just cut the baby in half and, give half to each of you. And one woman's like, all right, sure. And he's like, okay, you're not the mom. Whereas the other one's like, you know what? No, leave the baby alive and, like, give it to her. And he's like, okay, that's a true mother. I think David might be doing something kind of like that. Because Mephibosheth shows up, and he's just saying, I don't want anything from you. I don't want anything from you. I don't want anything from you. And that's exactly what you would probably say if you were subtly trying to, like, get everything from them, right? Hey, I just want to make sure we're on good terms. I just want to make sure that, like, we're bros. I don't want anything from you. No. And most people will be like, you don't want anything. I'm going to give you everything. And then the person's like, ha ha ha. My plan worked perfectly. I think this could be David using discernment.
Like a test almost.
He's testing him. And he says, okay, I'll give you half back. Right? So Ziba is still, like, basically Ziba still managed to steal half of it. But he's seeing how Mephibosheth responds. He says, okay, we'll split it 50-50. You'll have less than what you had before. We'll split it with Ziba, but I'm not going to leave you with nothing. And if that's the case, well, Mephibosheth passes the test like a champ, because look how he responds. And Mephibosheth said to the king, let him even take it all, since my lord the king has come in peace to his own house. Mephibosheth wasn't lying. He didn't have any. He's like, I don't even care. I wasn't here to have half the land. I just wanted to see you again.
He's just glad he's back.
Yeah, he's like, I'm just glad you're back. And my family's happy too, because now I can go take a shower. He's like, that's all I wanted. He's like, I don't care. And so this is where, if this were a test, you just get an A+++++ stamped on there. Mephibosheth passes with flying colors. This is just a cool dude. He's just super grateful to have David home. He's like, I don't need any land. I'm just glad to be in your presence again. I'll see you at dinner. Right? Like that's kind of what we have going on there, which I like that. All right, moving onwards. Take it away, Sean.
Now Barzillai the Gileadite had come down from Rogelim, and he passed over the Jordan with the king in order to send him off over the Jordan. Now Barzillai was very old, being 80 years old, and he had sustained the king while he stayed in Mahanaim, for he was a very great man. And the king said to Barzillai, You pass over with me, and I will sustain you in Jerusalem with me. But Barzillai said to the king, How long have I yet to live, that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I am now 80 years old. Can I know between good and bad? Or can your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Or can I hear any more the voice of singing men and women? Why then should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant would merely pass over the Jordan with the king. Why should the king compensate me with this reward? Please let your servant return, that I may die in my own city near the grave of my father and my mother. However, here is your servant Chimham. Let him pass over with my lord the king, and do for him what is good in your sight. So the king answered, Chimham shall pass over with me, and I will do for him what is good in your sight. And whatever you require of me, I will do for you. Then all the people passed over the Jordan, and the king passed over too. Then the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he returned to his place.
I love the other dude's name. It's like Chimham. That's his name in Hebrew. Chimham. It's like, I would hate to have that name, but it's I don't know. It's fun to say. Chimham. Do you remember that one video? Sorry, this is none of y'all remember this, but the video of, like the Joker, Batman and Robin,
That's exactly what I was thinking.
That's what reminded me of. Okay, so just as a reminder, I mentioned how the 3 encounters David has in this chapter are parallel to the chapters that he had when he was leaving Jerusalem, right? So whenever he was going down through the Mount of Olives and basically escaping to the Jordan, he had 3 encounters. He had one. Well, he actually had more than that, but there's parallels, right? So one was with Hushai, the old guy who wanted to support David, but David said, "You'd be a burden to me. You could actually do better back in Jerusalem," right? And so he said, "Don't go with me. Stay in your city." And then he encountered Ziba, who deceived him, right? And then he encountered Shimei, who was an outright enemy, right? So whenever he was leaving, he encountered somebody who was devoted to him, somebody who acted like he was devoted to him, and then he encountered an outright enemy. Now he has encountered an outright enemy who is begging for forgiveness, an actual ally who he had thought was an enemy, and now he's encountering a person who was truly devoted to him. And so we literally see the exact reverse of it, which is just really nice, because when David was leaving, it was really sad. But now it's really happy. And he's like, yay, I'm going back to Jerusalem. This is great. And all of it, I just love how it slows down, because this is all in the process of him just crossing the Jordan River. And we've been over there. The Jordan River is not a wide river. It's literally the length, it's the width of this living room. It's not a big river. And so it's just funny to me that all these interactions are having boom, 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 boom. He's just walking across, and he gets a few more steps, and then somebody else comes up to him, and then somebody else comes up to him. The idea is that basically all Jerusalem and all Israel is just gathered here to welcome him back. Now Barzillai the Gileadite had come down from Rogelim, and he passed over the Jordan with the king in order to send him off over the Jordan. So he's actually walking with him over the Jordan. Now Barzillai was very old, being 80 years old, and he had sustained the king while he stayed in Mahanaim, for he was a very great man. Do y'all remember this? Right? Remember back, I think it was chapter 17, whenever David arrived in Mahanaim, it said that there's this guy named Barzillai the Gileadite who came, and he had all this stuff, and he just gave it all to David and his men. Same dude, right? So this is a dude who, when David was at his lowest, he was supporting him. Apparently a very wealthy guy who had a lot of stuff, and he was supporting David and all of his men during all this time, which is just really cool. He showed a lot of devotion and support for David. And the king said to Barzillai, "You pass over with me, and I will sustain you in Jerusalem with me." So what is David offering him? Hospitality, come with me. It's a reward. He's like, hey, you supported me in my time of need. Come back to Jerusalem, man. I'll give you like fancy room in the palace, fancy food. I'll give you anything you want. Like, now that I'm in charge again, you're going to be eating fine for the rest of your life. Right? Like, he's basically just like offering him, kindness, which is good because David was very kind to his enemies already. So it's probably also good to be kind to your friends. But Barzillai said to the king, how long have I yet to live that I should go up with the king to Jerusalem? I'm now 80 years old. Can I know between good and bad? Or can your servant taste what I eat or what I drink? Or can I hear any more the voice of singing of men and women? Why then should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant would merely pass over the Jordan with the king. Why should the king compensate me with this reward? So how does he respond?
Why would you give me this reward?
Yeah, well, he's kind of just like, dude, I'm already like 1 foot in the grave already. Like, the reward wouldn't mean much to me. He's like, my mind's half there. I don't even know between good and bad anymore. I can't even taste food. So like, anything you had to offer me in Jerusalem, it wouldn't mean as much to me as it might mean to somebody else. Right? Yeah, I mean, I guess I could live in opulence for the final like 6 months of my life, but I won't appreciate it. Right? My mind's going out. My taste buds are going out. My sight's going out. My hearing's going out. He's like, I wouldn't appreciate the gift you're trying to give me. And so we see that this dude's actually a pretty cool guy too. Because he's going to say, instead of giving me the gift, maybe give somebody else the gift on my behalf. And so he says, why would you give me the reward? Please let your servant return that I may die in my own city, near the grave of my father and my mother. He said, that would actually be more meaningful to me. Rather than going to a distant land and moving, it's not that distant, but to him it probably is. He's 80 years old. I mean, it's only like a few miles, but when you're having to walk the whole way, it's a distance, right? And there's a lot of hills. He's like, rather than like going over and living in Jerusalem for the final few years of my life, let me just go back home. Like that'd be the greatest gift you'd give me. Let me die of old age in peace in the place where my mother and father are buried. That's the greatest gift you could give me. Let your servant return that I may die in my own city near the grave of my father and my mother. However, here is your servant Chimham. Let him pass over with my lord the king, and do for him what is good in your sight. So what does he suggest?
If I can't take you, let me take him instead.
Well, David's not the one suggesting it. It's Barzillai. Yeah, he's like, instead of taking me, take Chimham. A lot of people think that this guy is probably Barzillai's son. Right? He's like, hey, like, the gift wouldn't mean anything to me, but he's young. Take him. He'd probably love that. Do whatever you think is good in your sight. You see that the phrase good in your sight keeps returning, which is just a phrase that we've been tracking ever since, like, Judges, right? Because everybody did what was right in their own eyes, and there was no king in Israel. Doing what's good in your sight isn't always the best thing to do, unless you're David and you're keeping your eyes on God. Sometimes David does what's good in his own sight, and it's not great, but at this point, everybody's like, yeah, do what's good in your sight. Use your best judgment. So the king answered, Chimham shall pass over with me, and I will do for him what is good in your sight. You see how he reversed that? Right? Barzillai said, do what's good in your sight, David. And he said, how about this? I'll do what's good in your sight. Whatever you want me to do for Chimham, that's what I will do. And whatever you require of me, I will do for you. David's just a cool dude. So what's he saying there?
I'll take this guy back with me and do whatever like you would find pleasing, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah. Well, I guess just that.
Yeah, whatever you... But I just love the word require there, right? Here's a king talking to some random dude that says, whatever you'd require of me, I'll do it. Like, usually it's reversed. Usually the king is the one requiring something of somebody else. But here David is leading through being a servant, right? Once again, foreshadowing Jesus, right? He's like, hey, like, yeah, whatever you want for Chimham, tell me. Like, whatever you would have to do for him, that's what I'll do. Whatever you'd require of me, it'll be done. Like, David realizes that, like, as he's going back to Jerusalem, he is not treating this as a, ha-ha, I am in authority, I am in power again. He realizes, and this is something that David's always been very good at, he never lets his power go to his head. The only time he did was a fatal flaw, right? That was the David and Bathsheba thing, right? But he's very good about making sure that his power that he has is used to serve others. And so if he has power, and if he's returning to Jerusalem, it's not just so that he can be the king, it's so that he can serve people. And he says, hey, I'm no longer going to be needing you to feed me anymore. Now, I can feed you. What do you want me to do for you? And so as he's returning, he's finding ways to serve people. He's serving his enemies. He's serving the people who he thought was his enemy. And he's serving the person who actually kind of was his enemy and who deceived him. And then he's serving this person who was with him the whole time. So David is using his returned authority and power and prosperity to serve people, which is just really cool. Then all the people passed over the Jordan, and the king passed over too. So this is a moment of celebration. Like the people of Israel following Joshua across the Jordan River, so the people of Israel followed David over the Jordan River. And the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him and he returned to his place. So Barzillai goes back home, and David continues onwards, and just like the people of Israel went to Gilgal, that's where David's also going. Which leads us to the end of this chapter. Sean, read it for us.
Okay. Now the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went on with him. And all the people of Judah and also half the people of Israel accompanied the king. And behold, all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, why had our brothers the men of Judah stolen you away, and caused the king and his household and all David's men with him to pass over the Jordan? Then all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king is a close relative to us. Why then are you angry about this matter? Have we eaten at all the king's expense, or has anything been taken for us? But the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 parts in the king, therefore we also have more claim on David than you. Why then did you treat us with contempt? Was it not our word first to have our king return? Yet the words of the men of Judah were harsher than the words of the men of Israel.
Seeds of division are planted. Yay. This is what I was talking about whenever I said that division is going to be wedged in there. And this is something that eventually, like after the time of David and after the time of Solomon, this division is going to literally split the kingdom in two. Right? So we're going to have the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Israel. Right? But you see the seeds of it being planted even now, which is really sad. Even at the height of David's reign, I mean, we're not at the height of David's reign anymore, but even during David's reign, the best king of Israel, this division is already there, which is just kind of sad. So the king went on to Gilgal, right? And once again, this is the first city that the people of Israel went to whenever they first crossed into the Promised Land. So there's kind of a parallel there. The king went on to Gilgal, and Himcam went on with him, and all the people of Judah, and also half the people of Israel accompanied the king. Now, just to be clear, doesn't mean that literally every single person of the people of Judah was with him. No. And does it mean that literally one half of the people of Israel were with him? No. Right? What is the main point being communicated here?
More people from Judah.
More people from Judah than Israel. Right? It's as if everybody from Judah is there, and only half the people of Israel are with him. So there's more of a showing from Judah than from Israel, and so it seems like Judah is the greater supporter of David. Right? And behold, all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, why had our brothers, the men of Judah, stolen you away and caused the king and his household and all David's men with him to pass over the Jordan? So what are they asking there? It's worded kind of weird.
Yeah. Why did Judah get to go over?
Yeah, why are you with Judah? Why didn't you wait for us? We would have been there. If you just waited a little bit longer, like, more of us could have been, like, they basically feel underrepresented. And I'm just going to tell you right now, these people are just being super petty right now. But the reason why they're being this way is because, once again, Absalom had already kind of planted those seeds. Right? Absalom had planted the idea that David was showing favoritism towards Judah. Right? And then David unintentionally had furthered that idea whenever he was like, hey, Judah, y'all are my family. Come bring me across the Jordan. I don't think he'd intended to further that division, but that's what he unintentionally did. And once again, that's why I was saying, application-wise, it's not just about doing the right thing. It's also being mindful of how the actions you are doing might be perceived by the people around you. Right? And ultimately, you can't control how people perceive things, but you can help, right? You can try your best. And if you're aware of certain things, right? This is like whenever Paul talks about like not causing somebody to stumble, it's just teaching you, be mindful of the people around you. Because something is morally okay to do, and all because it's not inherently sinful, doesn't mean it is the right thing to do. you have to consider what message might this send to other people. And whenever David reached out to the people of Judah, there was nothing sinful about that. But it sent the wrong message to the people of Israel. And they're coming up here, and they're like, hey man, if you just waited for us a little bit longer, more of us could have been here too. Like, it's not that we don't like you. Like, we like you too, man. Like, we weren't sure how to respond. Because remember, that was what we saw early in the chapter? They're kind of like, oh, we kind of supported Absalom. Maybe, like, we should stay home. But then David didn't reach out to them. He reached out to the people of Judah. And so the people of Israel were like, oh, crud, we'll be there too. But then when it came to actually welcoming him across, they didn't show up enough. Right? So here David is making his majestic, triumphal entry, and not as many people of Israel are there. And they're kind of getting nervous, and they're like, well, we don't want the king to think that we don't like him. Like, we would have been there. Why didn't you invite us? Like, we just didn't know that you were already coming across. Like, just lack of communication. And then the men of Judah, God bless their souls, they don't respond in a way that is very helpful. The men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king is a close relative to us. Why then are you angry about this matter? Have we eaten at all at the king's expense, or has anything been taken for us? So, how did they retaliate? Well, the people are like, so why are all the people of Judah here? Why weren't we communicated to about this? What did the people of Judah respond?
Repeat the question again.
So the people of Israel are saying, what the heck? Why are all of y'all here, and why weren't we notified about this? How did the people of Judah respond? What are they saying there?
He's a relative.
He's a relative. It's because we're his family.
We're cool with him.
Yeah, we're closer. Yeah, we're buds.
Or more important.
Yeah. Technically what they're saying, once again, it's about how things are perceived. Is what they're saying false? No, it is true. That is literally what David said when he reached out to them. But this is not the moment to present it that way. You know what I mean? Like, you don't accentuate that at this point. This is literally just going to breed more antagonism, and it's just going to cause further conflict. They're just like, well, the reason we're here is because we're his brothers, we're his sisters, we're his family. If y'all weren't there, it must mean he doesn't like you as much. Which is not the message David wants to send. But this is how they respond, because they this is the message, that's how they received it probably. David reached out to them, and they're like, yeah, I guess we are tight. And so they let this go to their heads, and as a result, it's going to breed this further animosity, which ultimately, spoiler alert, is going to lead to further rebellion in the next chapter. Like, what we see here is going to flow directly into the next chapter. So all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, because the king is a close relative to us, why then are you angry about the matter? You shouldn't be mad. I mean, obviously, he would invite us. I mean, we're his friends. We're his family. Like, you have no right to be mad about this. Have we eaten at all at the king's expense, or has anything been taken for us? It's not like we're, taking anything from him. The implication is that they are, right? They're like, we're his family. Like, we don't have to take anything. Y'all ain't family, right? Anything that you have that is from the king, that's y'all taken from him. But the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 parts in the king. Therefore, we also have more claim on David than you. What do they mean when they say we have 10 parts in the king?
Tribes.
10 tribes.
Yeah, 10 tribes. Yeah, because the people of Judah, that is 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah. And then the other 10 tribes are the northern tribe. And they're like, hold your horses there. Y'all might be family, but we comprise more of the kingdom. Right? So if David owes more to something, it's actually us. Y'all might have blood relationship, but we are more, we have a bigger population. So we actually have a bigger claim on him than you do. And once again, David's just over here probably sitting like, oh, what have I done? Like, he literally just got back into this. He just got back into the country. And it's like, oh, great. We have 10 parts in the king, therefore we also have more claim on David than you. Why then did you treat us with contempt? They're like, why are you trying to argue with us? But ultimately, this contempt is already there. Was it not our word first to have our king return? They're like, we're the ones who said that we should get David back here. Y'all are just the ones he invited. Which is true, right? If you go back to the beginning of the chapter, they were the ones who were like, we should probably get David back here. The issue is they didn't know how to respond, right? They were like, well, we don't really know how to do this without, seeming like we have ulterior motives. And so they just kind of held their peace. But then David reached out to Judah and not them. And so they're like, we're the ones who actually wanted to bring him back. Y'all just waited till he invited you. And so basically, this is just turning into, petty squabbling. It's basically just school children just arguing with one another. And there's really no way to just solve this. The idea is that they're just not going to get along. Yet the words of the men of Judah were harsher than the words of the men of Israel. It's kind of a weird place to just end the chapter, but that's where they broke it up. And so next week, we'll be in chapter 20, and it'll flow directly into that. And we're going to see another rebellion break out. Woohoo! And then we'll also see Joab continue to be a trash bag, which is great, because Joab is awesome. Okay, real quick, I know it's already past 9 o'clock. That was a long chapter. I try to get us done at 9. But real quick, application points, what do y'all think of? I already kind of listed a few as we went through, but what are some different, maybe applicational type stuff? I like to kind of say that towards the end because I want us to understand the story first. What are maybe some insights that we can take away from this?
Discernment.
Discernment. Yeah. I feel like that's throughout 1st and 2nd Samuel. Those are really good books for discernment. No wonder David and Samuel wrote so many things in the Bible about it's not Samuel, Solomon, right? David and Solomon wrote so much about wisdom, right? Maybe be more specific. What type of discernment? I'm not just directing that at you. Discernment in regards to what?
Kind of like what Mephibosheth was doing in the chapter, thanking just the giver for him and not what David was appealing to Mephibosheth, wanting to give Mephibosheth.
Yeah.
Just thanking the giver, not the gift.
Yeah. Gratitude. That's a big thing, especially in relationship towards God, especially, right? Being grateful for who He is, even more so than the things that He's given us. We could also probably express that towards one another, right? Like Mephibosheth, he didn't want anything from David. He was just grateful to be in David's presence. That'd be kind of cool if we could have relationships like that, where we weren't just constantly using our friends to get something from them. We were just grateful to be with them. That'd be kind of cool. Yeah. Really, probably every single one of those interactions with David, there's probably some application there, right? Hey, Mom. Yeah. But in regards to, loving your enemies, right? David does great at that. Not holding grudges. I mean, he just the way that he, Amasa, right? The commander of the army and how he made it his commander, that's great, right? There's a lot there that you could unpack. And I know those are very general because, it's just textbook, love your enemies, discernment. And yeah, I know, but y'all are old enough to hopefully go deeper and find specific ways to apply this. But yeah, so there's a lot of application there. I don't want to keep us too long afterwards, though. So, anybody else?
I was gonna say, learn to forgive.
Yeah.
Easier because you know how Shimei was the one that threw stones at him. He's leaving and coming back. Even though he deserved to die, he didn't die. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, David had every right to actually. If somebody insults me, I have no right to kill them. that's overkill a little bit, literally. But David, according to the law, had the right to do that. Yet he still forgave, right? So often we do things we have no right to do. But David, he's just a cool dude. Yeah, you can learn a lot from him, just principles of forgiveness. Oftentimes whenever we talk about forgiveness and when we talk about loving our enemies and when we talk about discernment and stuff, we always dumb it down and water it down from what the Bible's talking about. Whenever we talk about forgiveness, we usually make it the easiest stuff to apply, where it's wow, I waved at that person and they didn't wave back. I guess I'm going to try to not be bitter about that. It's what? Well, yeah, I hope so. That's the bare minimum, right? That's not even severe. This dude literally was throwing rocks at David, cursing him and insulting him, and basically saying, I hope you go die. And then David comes back, he's it's alright, dude. We're cool. That's forgiveness.
The commander tried to kill him.
Well, yeah, the commander was literally the commander of the army who was opposing David and trying to murder him. And David's hey, you want to be the commander of my army? It's that's pretty cool. Yeah, and so the forgiveness and the loving of your enemies and stuff that the Bible talks about is actually a lot more extreme than we typically, how we typically present it nowadays. Usually we just try to define it in the most basic possible way so that we can feel really good about ourselves as Christians, and we're wow, I really loved my enemies today whenever I smiled at that person who didn't wave at me. I'm so good. No, the Bible's talking about a lot more extreme than that. What you did is called being a decent human being. And you don't have to be a Christian to do that. You just have to be a decent human being who doesn't murder people. And so, yeah, the Bible's calling us to do a much more extreme demonstration of love. But, okay, it is well past time. And I know people probably need to get home. And if not, y'all are also welcome to hang out and play board games and stuff like that. So we will do that. But I'm going to pray for us. Dear Lord, thank you so much for allowing us to be here today. I pray that as a result of this study, we will have a better grasp of just the story that you have given us in your word that teaches us about the amazing people that you have worked through throughout history, but also teaches us about you, God, and it teaches us principles about the things that you value and how we should live in our life. I thank you for your servant David, and I thank you for the things that he did well and the things that he didn't do well, because we can learn from both of those, God. And I thank you for you. I thank you that you have revealed yourself to us, God, when you didn't have to. And for some reason, even though we continue to rebel and sin, you still choose to pursue us, and we are so grateful for that. I pray for everybody in this room that as they depart from here and they go home, that they will travel safely and get to their homes safe and sound. I pray for the other people who are part of this group who couldn't make it tonight, that if they are traveling or if they're sick, that you will still keep them safe and restore them to full health. And also, just for our fellowship after this, God, I pray that you will govern our conversations and make them glorifying to you. And help us ultimately keep in mind the one for whom we all exist. We love you, God. We praise you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.